Hi there, and welcome to the Scottish Summit 2021, and specifically the track on Microsoft Teams and this session on etiquette in Microsoft Teams. Let's jump back a few years, though, before we actually get into some of the specifics on Teams itself. Electronic communication dates back actually all the way back to the 1960s. The Advanced Research Projects Agency, known as ARPA, now known as DARPA, basically an agency within the Department of Defense of the United States, was essentially the creator of what is now the modern internet. Back then, it actually was more of the first intranet that was ever developed by mankind, connected a bunch of nodes for DoD with also a number of educational institutions, colleges, things like that. And there was early online messaging built into that system so that if people were online, they could ping each other back and forth and send messages. But with several thousand users and only several hundred nodes to actually get on, you had to be on at the same time to be able to actually send messages. So in 1971, Ray Tomlinson, one of the contractors for ARPANET at the time, came up with the concept of an inbox or a receptor for these messages. And basically, the concept of modern email was invented with that inbox. 1991 came around 20 years later, and Microsoft rolled out Microsoft Mail. So essentially the first consumer version of, at least from Microsoft, of an email system that was available for real people. And then only 6 years later, Outlook became a thing as part of the Office, Microsoft Office offering. And that is to say, like, we've had email now, when you think about it, for upwards of 50 years. A long time in the technology space, but also not very long in the sense of the communication history of humans. Now, fast forward a little bit further even, and in 2016, Microsoft rolls out Microsoft Teams. And with that, we bring in a new paradigm of communication and collaboration within the Microsoft suite of software. And since Teams has rolled out, it has seen exponential growth. Even prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the scale of this growth was really, really impressive. And we got to the point where by April of 2020, so right after the pandemic really started taking shape and causing a lot of people to go work from home, we're already at 75 million daily active users. And then in October of 2020, Microsoft announced 115 million daily active users. These are the people that are in Teams on a daily basis, actually doing something in Teams. That is to say, Teams is doing amazingly well in the amount of people that are using it, but email still has a firm grasp. 50 years of history, and if we compare that to the number of users of email within Office 365, the closest data that we have is the concept of a monthly active user, MAU, compared to the DAU for Teams. There's actually 250 million of those. So at least of the Office 365 or Microsoft 365 subscribers out there. Now, if you have an Office 365 account, that doesn't necessarily mean that you do have an email inbox, but most likely you probably do. And I say all this to basically point out the fact that while Teams is on a skyrocketing projection, it is not actually nearly up to the level of ubiquitousness or that email is. And people have been living in an email world now for basically a full lifetime of a workforce, right? The last people who would not have had email in their workplace, at least for a knowledge worker, have probably retired or even all died. And now we're at a point where everybody knows email. And then Teams and chat and that kind of new collaboration comes out. We have a new opportunity here. There's a lot of bad practices that we can relate to within the email, or a lot of bad practices within the email space that we can kind of take as a learning opportunity moving into Teams, because Teams is such a big change for a lot of people, and a lot of people are being dragged into it, that we can essentially say, hey, this is a new space. Don't do some of the things that you were doing in email because that's not allowed. Just the concept of it being so different can make you have the ability to tell people that it's not allowed to be done or that you shouldn't do it. Therefore, they might actually follow the rules. And there are a number of those use cases that I'm sure many people can relate to. The most common one for me that really boils my blood is the mistaken reply all, which at an organization that I worked for way back in the day, our entire network was brought down one time by reply all threads of people saying, please take me off this distribution, please take me off this distribution, please stop replying all, please stop replying all. And it's just bad practice. So poor etiquette is not a new problem in the workplace. or in the workplace communications in general, which is why we have the opportunity here to try to fix things before people really get deep into how Microsoft Teams works. And that's why I put together a resource with a partner of mine, AvePoint, to offer this etiquette guide for using Microsoft Teams. Something that we wanted to put out for free, not behind any sort of email submit, wall. It is both a web version and a PDF that you can download. And it's basically meant to be a nice starting compact where you can give this to or share it among your team and say, these are some of the rules that we can start out with, and then we can make our own rules as we go forward to try to keep the way that we use Teams a good, productive, professional experience and not the bad experience that sort of email has grown into. And if you do that from the start, people are much more likely to actually stick with it for the long haul. And that brings me to our session today, which is a basic etiquette intro for Microsoft Teams. My name is Matt Wade. I'm a Microsoft MVP for Office Apps and Services. That means I do not work for Microsoft. I'm co-founder of Jump to 365, which is well known for its infographics, blog, YouTube videos, those kinds of things. Probably best known for the periodic table of Office 365 and similar resources to show what the Office 365 and Microsoft 365 platform can be used for and how best to use it. But we're not here to talk about M365 from a general standpoint. We're really here to talk about Teams today. So let's just step back a tad and actually talk about what Teams is. So Teams is essentially bringing together a number of features into one app that before used to be in a number of different apps or maybe didn't even exist before. So the communication part, just like any other communication tool like email or like text messaging, it has its own communication style, and that is through chat, whether that's private chat or group chat in the conversation space within a team. These are persistent messaging, so you can actually go back and see things after you close out a window or close the app. The files are being stored in SharePoint or OneDrive and being shared that way so that you're not always emailing attachments back and forth and having multiple copies and losing out on the concept of that single source of truth. Your files that are in Office can be edited directly in Teams or opened directly in the Office apps, but in Teams it's using the Office for the web. Teams is also a meeting and conferencing tool. A lot of people got pulled in directly as a result of having to work from home, and the meetings aspect is what they got introduced to first, but then come to find out there's a lot more to it. It also has presence and status, so you can put in your status updates, whether you're available, and it will also identify whether or not you're in a meeting, do not disturb, things like that. Teams also offers the option for you to bring in third-party apps as tabs, bots, or connectors, which is pretty cool. And the app is fully native to pretty much every major platform: Windows, Mac, Android, and iOS. And to kind of put it in easy to compare terms here, it's essentially all of these apps kind of wrapped up into one, whether or not you really know it. And if you don't know what all these apps are, no problem. But if you do, you can kind of get an idea of what the task was to kind of bring all these things together. Now, when you do go forward and you start using Teams, especially the team aspect, when you go into create a team, you get a lot with that team. It's not just a permission group. It comes with the chat space. The chat space has some wikis attached to it, but it also has behind the scenes that SharePoint site where the files live, a planner plan so you can actually do everyday project management. It also includes a portal for your videos in Microsoft Stream. It has some connections to Microsoft Forms and also Microsoft OneNote. And it's important to really know what you're getting into when you jump into this. So you may want to take a look at this infographic later. There's also a slight connection to Outlook. You can actually get an email inbox, an email calendar attached to the team with the same membership group assigned with it. So you can actually get a lot of benefits here, but you do have to reach out to your IT team for that. So the ebook that I published with AvePoint is separated by chapters, as is this session. So I'm going to start here with chapter 1, some general tips within the concept of Microsoft Teams and the etiquette there. With Teams, you have a web experience, you have a desktop experience, and you have a mobile experience. Generally speaking, you should stick to the desktop and the mobile apps. Do not use the web app if you can get away with it. Basically, you get much more features with the desktop app and the full apps installed. That being said, it can be really handy to jump back and forth between the desktop app and the web app. I generally have a browser open to like one section of Teams while I have the desktop app open to another, because sometimes it's not easy to jump around in the app itself. You lose context, things like that. Another thing is notifications. You're probably going to find yourself being over-notified by Microsoft Teams if you don't go in and actually start massaging the notifications that you actually want. So if you are over or underwhelmed by the notifications you're getting, make sure you get them right. Check settings in the desktop app or the notifications on your mobile device. Couple quick tips on notifications. You specifically can actually turn off notifications on certain conversations. You can also turn them off for entire channels. So compare this to email. You can't do that with email. When you get an email that's a marketing email and you get an email from your boss that you have to do something now, Outlook considers them to be equally important. You get a notification for both. Teams lets you actually filter out the stuff that you don't want to pay attention to unless somebody specifically @mentions you using the @ and calls you out for a direct notification. So you could stop following a certain channel, maybe in this case the sales channel. You're not in sales, you're in the engineering group. You shouldn't be paying attention to that. But on the one-off time when somebody has to call you out for some technical specification conversation, they can call you specifically. You can come into the conversation, provide your input, and never go back. It's actually one of the biggest wins that comes along with Microsoft Teams. Another thing about notifications is the concept of quiet hours. If you're not familiar with quiet hours, it's a feature that's available on the mobile app where you can essentially tell your app to never send you notifications outside of your work days or your work times. Really, really handy to kind of push hard on that work-life balance, because you just won't get notifications if it's not within the times or the days that you choose yourself. Now, moving on to chapter 2, conversations. Within a Microsoft team, inside those channels, you have conversations. So go forward and make sure when you are in conversations, if you want somebody to see a message, make sure to @mention them. It might seem overkill, but just like in an email, you wouldn't not include their name in the to field. Same deal here. They won't necessarily get the full-on notification or won't know the importance of the notification if you don't @mention them. So make sure you absolutely do that. Also, quick tip, if you are typing in their name and you press enter, you can press backspace to clear out the ending part of their name to be a little bit more informal or just to clean things up. Some organizations have very lengthy names that include like their organization or office location. Get rid of that, not necessary. Unfortunately for organizations that use a last name, last comma first setup, doesn't work really well. So unfortunately, you'll have to deal with that. Now, on that message of @mentioning, do not @mention the team or channel unless necessary, and be aware of how many people you're going to be hitting. Nobody likes more notifications than they need, and frankly, if you're sending a notification out to dozens or hundreds of people, you're basically spamming. Nobody likes to be spammed, so think about it before you press send. Also, and this is one of the biggest things that you should actually take away from this session, always make sure when you start a new conversation in a channel to press that little formatting button on the bottom left, the little A with a paintbrush. That provides you all the formatting options, but it also gives you this one line called the subject. Always use a subject. If you go through and scroll through a channel where it's all conversations without subjects, they all blend in together. There's no context as to what the conversations are. Always, 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 always use a subject line. I have yet to find an experience where subjects were not a positive addition to the team's experience. So this is one of those, it is black and white. There is no gray as far as I'm concerned. There might be some I've not come across yet, but as of yet, I have not come across one. Please use a subject line. You would not do it with an email. In fact, a lot of email apps don't even let you send an email without a subject line. You should be doing the same thing within Teams. Now, on that comparison to email, when you're in a team, messages in a team in a conversation are essentially equivalent to an email, or at least that's my perspective and what I've seen with organizations that I've consulted with. Don't necessarily expect an immediate response. Whatever the type of response you would get, whatever the urgency of a regular email would be, that's the urgency that you should expect back, the response time you should expect back when somebody sends a message that references you. Now, in those messages, you have the ability to react. The most important reaction that is available to us is the thumbs up. That option is not meant for sentiment. This is not Facebook. This is not your friend's new baby photos popping up and you like those because you just like them. That thing can be really useful for acknowledgement. Think about how many times you complain about how much email you get. A lot of the email you get is just unnecessary, but, well, no value add, but still necessary responses of like, okay, got it, thanks, see you then, those type of responses. If you could just thumbs up something, that provides so much information for minimal effort, and you don't have to see a whole list of those responses and reply alls like you would in an email. That being said, the rest of the responses can be whatever you need them to be for. However, if you are using the thumbs up as like a little legitimate acknowledgement tool, don't use any of the other reactions, because that thumbs up is really meant to be valuable to the person that's looking for people to acknowledge that you've said something and that they understand what was said. That being said, the one that we're missing out on is the most important, which is to provide that nice eye roll. If you have trouble with people accepting the 6 reactions that are there, they are actually the same ones that are in Facebook. So if they know how to use Facebook, they know how to use the Teams reactions. Oddly, they are not the same ones as LinkedIn, another Microsoft product. Also, not the same ones that are in Yammer, another Microsoft product. So there's 3 different Microsoft products out there that have different reaction options. But at least with the Teams ones, these are the exact same reactions that exist in Facebook. Should not be new for them. Now, when it comes to the fun stuff, memes, GIFs, and stickers, match how you use these to your culture. These things take up space. Not everyone likes them, and you might not be as funny as you think you are. Keep a specific channel for fun stuff where memes and GIFs are fair game. These things take up so much space that a lot of the times they actually drown out good content. So one little line of text only takes up this much space, but a GIF war takes up a lot of space and you have to scroll to see through it. So don't overwhelm things with memes and GIFs in the actual workspace. Have a water cooler or a miscellaneous space for that. Also, be absolutely aware of the settings on your team. One of the big ones is the fact that teams can include guests. So anybody with an email address can be invited into a team if the settings are set up correctly in your team. So just be aware of what you're saying in front of what audience. You can always find out who the members are in your team by clicking on the little midline ellipsis to the right of your team name and see Manage Team. Even if you're not an owner, you can still see that, and it'll show you the list of members in your team. Now, on the topic of guests, if you do invite guests, you're going to have to add their names, their email addresses, and then their names are going to be pulled in automatically from their email addresses. Almost always, those names are going to come in super ugly. You have an opportunity here. There's a little pencil. Please press that little pencil and actually format their name correctly, and then press the little checkbox. Every time their name is used in the future in your organization, it will be nice and clean and represent them correctly. Now, one little feature that I think is so overlooked. Every channel in a team has an email address. That email address means that you can actually send an email from the outside to the team. You can set it up so that only certain people can send your emails to it, only certain domains, at company.com or anybody. And it's really handy because it means you don't have to just talk about an email or like reference the email or copy and paste an email into Teams to have the conversation. You can just forward it. And all the attachments actually get forwarded in there as well. Or you can remove certain attachments from the email if you would like. Really, really, really handy. There's also another option coming out soon, which is the Share to Teams from Outlook. This actually even lets you send to a private chat. There are pros and cons to both of these. For example, you'll see in this one, you cannot actually edit the email, versus if you forward an email, you can edit the content. Now, there's an ethical question there, but like if that email is super long, and you just want to like cut it down so that only the important stuff is there, you can totally do that. This one does not allow that. But it's easier. It's much easier because it's built in. You can also send it to private chat. So there's some pluses and minuses in both sides of that. Now, this would justify an entire session just to itself. But when it comes to teams, and if you're an owner, be a good team owner. This is where you can get to the team owner information, which is the Manage Team button there. Stay up to date on adding and removing members for the team. Add a unique photo or graphic for the team profile so it stands out. And then there are a lot of settings that you can tweak that could actually offer you some benefits over what comes from Teams by default. Now, jumping into chapter 3, let's talk about channels. First off, channels have names. Channels can be renamed, but there are downsides to renaming channels. one of those is that the connected SharePoint site folder will actually not get renamed when you rename a channel, or at least in some cases, that's the case. Microsoft is currently fixing that. As I say this right now, it might work for you, it may not. So if it doesn't change the name in the folder, in the documents library, in the SharePoint site that's associated, don't change the name. Because once you do, you will actually break the connection. You have to deal with the old name for the time being. That being said, when you do name channels, it's kind of handy to put little emoji in there. It lets you kind of brand the channels a little bit better. I like to put them ahead of the name, but that also kind of screws with the alphabetical order because emoji are their own letters and characters, and they have their own alphabetical order. But it does kind of make things a little bit easier to find things. Also, keep your channel listing simple to start and allow it to grow organically, and make yourself justify to yourself that you need more channels whenever somebody asks for one. The longer the channel listing gets, the easier it is to miss stuff, frankly. And the more teams you're in, the more channels, it just gets overwhelming very quickly. So you want to be really smart and strategic. Do not just create channels randomly in an ad hoc way like you might have made folders in a shared drive. It just gets to be a real pain and a nightmare to deal with. And keep a space specifically for those memes, GIFs, stickers, and whatnot so that they're not taking up all the space from good work-related content in the work-related channels. Now, one thing that you can't do is get rid of the general channel. Everybody has a general channel. You can't rename it. You can't move it. You can't delete it. You can't hide it. So use it. Use it for announcements. There's actually a specific announcement type of message. You can actually get a lot of value out of this because it has this nice little banner at the top. You can add a message or an image to it. It also has a subject line under that, so almost like a subheading, and then you can send a message there. The general channel is really good for big picture stuff for the whole team, and it's just a really useful thing to use when you move forward. But the big thing here about channels is you only should be creating channels when you really, really need them because there's just so many of them. It's easy to make so many of them, and it just gets really, really overwhelming. Now, in the last year and a half, new feature is private channels. People love the idea of private channels, being able to protect a space within a team. It's incredibly tempting. However, it's really, really hard to work with because a lot of the times the people that need this are not savvy enough to really own a team. And essentially when you create a private channel, you're creating almost like a separate little team. So make sure the people that do need these actually get some training because the team owner themselves don't necessarily have access to the private channel. And if they don't, they're not going to be able to help or support because, that information is sensitive. They're not allowed to see the conversations or the files attached to it. A couple things about private channels. First off, all members of the private channel have to be a subset of the team. They can't just be other random people pulled in. That's not possible. Also, the team owners are not necessarily owners of the private channel. So you might have a management private channel or a finance private channel, and only the people that are in the finance area are in that, and they are the private channel owners, and the owner of the team itself is some tech-savvy data analyst from the engineering side or something like that. But that person has no reason to be part of the finance channel. So they're not there to be an owner. So just be aware of that. Then the files. Because of the way SharePoint permissions work, if you were to create just a document library in the SharePoint site behind the scenes and behind Teams, the team owner would always have access to that. Well, we don't want them to. So Teams actually creates a totally separate site, and that site is owned by the private channel owners. The site has a name that looks similar to the other site, but they're not related. So this is a complex solution to a complex problem. It might seem like, I just need some permission setups in the team. It's not that simple. So if you are going to move forward with using private channels, you need to know what you're doing, and you need to be very strategic as to what you're going to do with it. Now that brings us on to Files, Chapter 4. One of the advantages of Office 365 is the ability to co-edit documents, so take advantage of it. Stick to a single source of truth for your files. 30 draft copies of a file flying around your inbox, so last decade. So make sure to upload your files into the Files tab of a team. Organize them in your folders. You can even add metadata in SharePoint and then bring them back. You can see that in the Files tab later on. You can't do the editing of the metadata in Teams itself, at least not yet. But definitely do that and then reference it and bring those files up in the team or the conversations by clicking the little attach button. Very, very nice thing for that. A nice thing with respect to files in the Office 365, Microsoft 365 experience, there's a huge file size support. So I think actually this 100 gigabyte actually just went up recently. But let's say it's 100 gigabytes right now. Those are huge files. So you should probably never have to worry about file size support. Each team can hold up to 25 terabytes of data. That's a lot of information, presuming that you have that amount of space, because SharePoint space does actually depend on the number of people in your organization. You can always pay for more if you need more space. Another thing is there's actually a character limit to the number of characters in the URL of a file. That number is 400 characters. And then there's also a character limit if you sync your files to Windows 10, that's 260 characters. So let's just say that the limit here is 260 characters to be more conservative. There's a good reason to try to limit the number of subfolders that you have. However, there's also a human reason. A lot of subfolders means you basically have to have an atlas to understand how to find files. It's a nightmare. So just please don't do that to people. So 3 levels of folders deep inside a channel. Keep in mind that the team itself is basically folder 1, the channel is folder 2, and I'm talking about 3 more folders after that. So you're talking about basically 5 folders levels deep. You really shouldn't need more than that, and if you do, you need to start considering breaking out your folder structures and your files anyway, just for people to not have to spend half of their day looking for files or understanding this file structure. Now, I mentioned syncing. You can use OneDrive, which you might know as a place to keep your personal work-related files in Office 365. Well, it is also a tool to sync files from Teams. There's a sync button in Teams, or if you don't see that, you can go to the SharePoint site behind the scenes and sync from there. You can sync to your Mac or to your Windows device, and you'll be able to access those files right in the Mac OS Finder or in Windows Explorer. Now, if you are a SharePoint geek like me, one of the nice things about Teams is that you get a full-fledged SharePoint Teams site behind the scenes. That means you can always open that up from the Files tab. There's a little Open in SharePoint button, and you get a site that you can create more document libraries. You can add those document libraries as tabs in Teams, so if you need more places to keep files, you can definitely do that. You can add pages, you can add lists, a whole 9 yards. So you can make this a whole experience, and it can be really, really good. Now, one question I get frequently is, can I lock down certain files and folders in Teams? Technically, yes, you'd have to do it from SharePoint because you can always change permissions on individual files and folders. However, you are always taking a risk here because object level permissions, which is what this is called, file or folder level permissions, are a nightmare to manage. So imagine you're the owner, you make a bunch of ad hoc decisions over the course of 2 or 3 years, you pass over the site or the team to somebody else, that person has no context as to why things are what they are. There's no good report out process to get the permissions of the whole listing of everything in that site. So if you want to do this, you should really think about it. Generally, I recommend if you need a special place for permissions, make a new document library at the highest level in the site and make that be a whole bucket of everything that needs those special permissions. If you need another one, make another document library. I would generally not make it a folder-based thing because that's much easier to forget that that's being set up that way. Now, for a lot of people, Teams is a private chat tool. They came over from Skype, and this is a replacement for Skype chat. And actually, a lot of people overuse chat. Perhaps I would generally call chat a major crutch within the Teams world. Unfortunately, because Teams makes chat so easy, people just kind of work in the chat space, and you really shouldn't. Frankly, the team space is much better because as people join and leave, the content always stays, versus the chat. Content can be deleted, people can leave, people can lose their files, bad things can happen. So chat is really good for basically, ad hoc kind of stuff. Sending messages to friends, checking in, hey, can you get me that thing that I asked you for? Keeping up to date with your colleagues, your peers, your friends. The urgency here is similar to Skype, or a text message even. And I would say, don't fully depend on this though. If you're actually doing work, you definitely want to be over in a team because that's where decisions should be made. And for that reason, I generally tell people to keep your chat count low. Like if you're going into the 15, 20, 25, 30 person private chat, group size, you're probably making decisions. And that's not really good. You want those decisions to be recorded someplace. You want them to be actual threaded conversations. There are a lot of feature benefits to Teams over private chat. One, that threaded conversations is a big deal, right? You actually can keep track of things and not have to be worried about 8 people having different conversations at the same time and the little bubbles pop up in different places. You can actually link to different conversation messages in a team, and you can't do that in chat. There's a lot of features, frankly, that are a thing there. Now, if you already have a chat going with people and you create a new chat with those same people, there will actually be 2 chats with the same individuals with 2 conversations. So this can get confusing. So try to avoid that unless necessary. So give those teams or those group chats names. And when you add people to a chat, really handy, you can actually choose whether or not they can see the history. So if you're bad-mouthing Tom before you add Tom, probably don't let him see that. Now, this is one of the features here that really impacts the overall experience with chat versus Teams. When you upload a file to share to a private chat, that file gets uploaded into your OneDrive for Business. Now, if somebody else in that chat uploads a file, it gets shared to their OneDrive for Business. And basically, all those files are being shared from one-off OneDrive for Businesses and being sent in here. Now, you can see a central listing of all these files in the Files tab of the conversation, but the thing is, when somebody leaves the organization, their OneDrive for Business gets deleted eventually, which means if you're depending on these files for business critical stuff, they're going to go away potentially. Or if somebody just deletes the file, whatever, you're at a loss because it's their file to delete. You have no control over it. Versus if you're in the team, if somebody deletes a file, you can restore it from the recycle bin. And if you didn't realize it, you actually have 93 days to restore something from the recycle bin before it's actually deleted permanently. So when you do upload a file into a private chat, it gets uploaded into this folder called Microsoft Teams Chat Files. Whether you knew that or not, now you do. So I think that's an important one for you to be aware of. Now, when you are private chatting with somebody, this is probably when the person's status matters the most. Pay attention to their status. You'll notice green, yellow, red, and those are pretty standard. The big one I want to point out here is when somebody's out of office, if they are using the mobile app or any of the apps, web or desktop, but the mobile app is the one that kind of triggers it the most. If they happen to come in to check their messages and they're out of office, their status will say available, out of office, and the little icon will not be a green circle with a white check. It'll be a filled green circle. It'll be an outline green circle with a green check in it. That means that they're actually out of office. Any of these statuses has an out of office version that is a outline of that color with whatever the mark is inside of that. So if you ever see an open circle in the color, it means that person's out of office. So respect the fact that they're probably just checking in on what they've missed or whatever else they want to check in on, or do a status check. They're not there to actually be spoken to. So give them a little bit of privacy. And on the concept of privacy, you do not have any. Just like any other system, IT system that is provided by your organization, whether you know it or not, an IT administrator or multiple has access to all the information that's shared. This question comes up a lot. Hey, what can my teacher see? What can what can my boss see? Well, those people generally can't see anything. Usually, to actually ever get anything, it requires an HR person and a director of HR and the lead counsel of that organization, usually the CEO or the head administrator of that organization, to approve pulling and looking at what's being said. That kind of thing happens only usually when there's a legal element involved. That would be maybe sexual harassment or any sort of bribery or something going on that happened over their system. So don't do that stuff over a work system. It's really stupid to do that. But even if you did it in email 15 years ago, you would have the same lack of privacy. So let's just put it that way. So that brings us to meetings and calls. A lot of people got pulled into Microsoft Teams, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, because of the Zoom-like online meetings that Teams fosters. So I will say, there's a lot more to Teams than just meetings. You will have seen already in this session. But for those of you who got pulled in just from meetings, there's a lot more to it. And those of you who haven't really used meetings yet, there's a lot to meetings that you have a lot that you can get out of. First off, you can schedule meetings directly from the calendar app within Teams. That calendar is the same calendar that you have in Outlook. You're just looking at it from two different apps, but it's the exact same calendar. So when you are scheduling out, you have the option here to include a channel. So you can have a meeting in a channel. So it's a nice little way to have a history of the meeting, and the conversation that you have with that meeting is available, as a conversation right in that channel, which is super, super nice. But you can still invite people, including people outside your organization, just like if it was an Outlook meeting. And with the invitation, there's automatically included a join link at the bottom. And if you have also the audio conferencing Bridgeline connection, it will include the phone number and the conference ID. So you don't necessarily have to have the Teams app to join that call. You can also call in using your phone. Now, when you do join, you have the ability here to customize your background. So you can actually use blur, you can replace it with an image, one provided by Microsoft, or you can upload your own, which is pretty handy. And then during meetings, you want to make use of the chat. So it's helpful to share web addresses, maybe contact names, spelling, and other information while someone else is talking. These chats in the meetings are part of the channel, if it's a channel meeting, or it's part of your private chats. You'll actually see it in the list of chats if you click the chat app in Teams. So everyone can refer to this after the meeting, all without disrupting the call. Also really handy because after the meeting ends, that chat is still available. It's a nice way to be able to chat with people not in your organization because they're all in this one central safe space that is the meeting. Now, it is 2021. It's time to turn on your video. If you don't use your video, you need to use your video. Human beings are, when they communicate, mostly look at body language, facial expressions. Yes, what you hear is important, but what you see is more important. Video facilitates a much more effective meeting than audio, so please, please, please use video. Please be in a reasonably well-lit space. Don't have your camera be down here. No looking up nostrils. It's not really that hard. Just think a little bit about it ahead of time, and you'll have a very good experience, and everybody else will too. Now, when it comes to using sound, you are the only person, fun fact, in your meeting that doesn't hear the background noise coming from your microphone. So generally, it's not a bad idea, or no, it's a really good idea, to mute when you are not talking. And that is to protect other people from your audio. Who knows what you're going to hear in the background? If you have kids running around or your pets are doing whatever, somebody goes and flushes the toilet or turns on the dryer, who knows? That kind of stuff can be really distracting. Now, in a meeting of 4 or 5 people where it's just open discussion, maybe not necessary. But in a larger meeting, absolutely necessary. Now, if you're leading the meeting, absolutely share your screen. It's really great for people to be able to stay on top of what's going on by the person leading it, sharing exactly what they have. Now, maybe you happen to be sharing a Word document that everybody's editing at the same time. That's still worth sharing. So that even if people are on a different page, they can still see where you are and what you are doing. Now, PowerPoint's probably one of the biggest features in Teams for being able to share because you're giving a presentation, right? Well, there are a lot of ways to use PowerPoint. You don't just have to use the built-in PowerPoint sharing tool. You can use PowerPoint, the desktop app, and use a couple tricks that I've put together in the link that you see there. Definitely look into that because you can really up your game with presentations and Teams meetings by following some of the tips that I put together there. Now, one thing we don't have a whole lot of control over is our face versus our content. So if you're sharing content, your face gets pushed down along with everybody else at the bottom, and the content becomes the big thing. Now, everybody else can choose what their view is, and they can choose to pick your face instead of the content, but at that point, what's the point of seeing your face if you're trying to show off slides or something else? But there is a cool little trick where you can open up the camera app on your Mac OS device or your Windows device and put that next to the content that you want to share, and then share your whole screen. So you can see in this screenshot, I have open, I use a Mac generally, I have QuickTime Player open, and it is basically showing a feed of my camera at the same time as I'm showing a web page next to it. And then actually in this screenshot, I actually have an iPad in front of me. So I have this Microsoft whiteboard open on my iPad, and I can handwrite things, and you can see me and see my screen at the same time while I'm handwriting. Very, very useful. And it really has nothing to do with it's a hack, right? It's nothing to do with Teams. It also has to do with what did I put on my screen, and now I'm sharing my screen. So there's more information you can find at the link below. And it's really kind of handy. Definitely check that out. But there are some caveats, so you do want to read about it before you start using it. And when you are sharing web pages, zoom in. Control plus or control minus will zoom in on web pages. If you think it's big enough, go up 1 or 2 more. probably. It's definitely worth doing. Also, if you're the recipient, if you're on the receiving end and that person is not zooming in, you can zoom in on what they see or what they're showing, and it will just zoom in for you and not for anybody else. So that's a cool little tip that most people don't know. So that brings us essentially here to the end. To wrap up on this, I just want to talk about how, again, this is an opportunity. This is a paradigm shift from something that we've been using now for half of a century, email, to basically an entire collaboration solution in one purple wrapped burrito of conversation, files, meetings, calling, and all the other third-party apps that you can bring into this certain situation. That being said, this isn't exactly a nirvana, right? Like, it's not going to be perfect, but with a little bit of effort, you can definitely bring things up from the level that we've been kind of tolerating in email for the last number of decades to something better. So I just say, take the opportunity that you have, make things better, provide those best practices, live those best practices, and invite people into the new world and recover from the hangover that has been email for the last half of a century. And if you're interested in seeing more with that ebook, you can actually add this as a tab right into your team's channel. So you can kind of make this a little compact to start and say, hey folks, we're going to try to agree to this. And if it doesn't meet your full needs, which it may very well not, that's perfectly fine. Take the content that's in it and make a Word doc that's something similar and add that. Make some additions or remove some things that you don't think are as relevant. And I think that's, perfectly relevant or reasonable. Now, the question that most people always ask me, what resources do I have to share? I have so many resources to share. First, you can get today's slides from my website, but also you can see this video and get the slides from the summit itself. These videos should be posted to their YouTube channel within 14 days of being published. Also, if you like this content, I have a book coming out later this year. It's called Teach Yourself Visually Microsoft Teams, and it will include step-by-step screenshotted instructions that will cover a lot of what we talked about today, plus more, and all the good tips and tricks and kind of little nuggets that hopefully you walked away with today. And then on top of that, you'll find a whole bunch of other resources that should be super useful for moving forward and getting the most out of Microsoft Teams. On top of that, I need to say thank you so much to all the sponsors for this event: ScriptRunner, DQ Global, Proximo 3, Hitachi, Agilysys, Redspire. Thank you so much for supporting such a great event. I really hope I can come to this event in the future in person. I've heard so many good reviews of it in person, especially from last year from some of my friends and peers and colleagues who have attended. But I really do look forward to it, and I thank you all again for coming out to this session. Feel free to connect with me on all the major social media business social media platforms. You can follow me on Twitter. I accept all LinkedIn requests. I got to have a blog out there that you can follow for some tips and tricks. And then the YouTube channel that I run through Jump to 365. And with that, I will once again say thank you so much for attending today. And I hope you got something out of this. And if you like this, absolutely feel free to leave feedback and let the showrunners here know what you liked. If you didn't like this, still let the showrunners know, because it's only fair to them to not invite me back next year if I'm not a welcome addition to this event. So I hope everybody has a great 2021 with dealing with Microsoft Teams, Microsoft 365, all the changes that come with it. And keep your eyes peeled for Microsoft Ignite, which is only a few days away now. Lots of new stuff. And hey, I know this thing is a whole big fire hose of information that we're trying to drink from constantly, but always keep in mind that it's basically guaranteed job security for all of us. So thanks again, and take care.